everybody. This is Mohanraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans. I'm Marianne Mohanraj, and I'm here with
Well, for one thing, you're here with Benjamin Rosenbaum, but
Benjamin
also,
Rosenbaum. But also, we have a guest today, Jason Hill, who is, and now I should have looked up your title, publisher, editor at Choice of Games, both.
I call myself the chief operating officer or the grouch in chief. There's a
Yeah.
there's a variety of nicknames and or titles that have
do they
been
give you
appended to
a
mine.
trash can for the? I feel like Grouch in Chief. You should have a
I,
trash can
you
shaped
know,
office. That would be.
my wife might say something about that, in fact. But anyway,
Now,
she
now
made me move some boxes.
I feel like we should get David Mills to do like a little logo chibi for you
Oh, yeah.
with a trash can. Anyway, Choice of Games, for those who aren't familiar, is a online phone game, and maybe not just for phone. I'm not sure. I'll let Jason tell
The
us.
browser, all the app
Okay,
stores, whatever,
etc.
Steam.
And I've played a little of it because I looked at it once upon a time, and I've played through Ben Rosenbaum's game. So I know something about it, but Jason and Ben know a lot more. And so we'll be asking them questions about it. My sense from having talked to Jason way back in the early days of the Earth was that this is essentially very similar to a choose your own adventure game in format, choose your own adventure book in format, if you all remember those from the print era, and where there are various paths, and you put your fingers in the different pages to kind of hold them down so you can see, like, in case I die here.
If you're cheating.
No, this is not how you read those books. In case I die going down this path, how could I easily go down the other path? So
Mm,
I like to hedge my bets. Okay. So,
sure.
but now we've entered the internet age. So, Jason, do you want to just tell
I should
people a
just say
little?
for
Oh,
framing, because I don't think that entirely frames. I published a Choice of Games title, and Jason was the editor on it, for those who don't know. And so
yes.
we have dragged Jason on the show to talk about this aesthetic project and it as a market and
Mhm.
also our collaboration and so on. And just because I think one thing we've done at various times on the show is bring in people like, the audiobook narrator of The Unraveling, or people we've done game design with, or whatever. So like different windows, different corners of the industry, and of the craft and whatever. So, and Choice of Games are really interesting. We'll get into it, but it's a really interesting medium, a really interesting take on interactive fiction. And so I must think that, since I spent 5 years writing Joseph Games' title. So,
I
Yeah.
hope so.
all right, now you can turn it over to Jason. I just wanted them to know,
Yeah. No, no, no.
why did we drag him on?
Sure.
Yeah,
And I'll also say, I think you've been nominated, Choice of Games has been nominated for various Nebula Awards and Hugo Awards. Is that right? And
Not yet for Hugo.
not yet for,
There's
is
still
there a
not a
category?
category. No.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
like not one that we could really compete in. Like the closest would be, I think, best related work, and you're
Hmm.
going up
That's
against
very
comic
broad.
books and yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
Um, what? So we are, inspired by both the Choose Your Own Adventures of the '80s and then also the parser text adventures of the '80s, as defined by Zork or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the game, not the book. Um, and
Pick up
so
Rod,
yeah, so
put down
both
Rod,
of
get Bird.
those, yeah, exactly. Both of those are considered, forms of interactive fiction, and we're in between those two to a certain degree, in that we're using the format and the multiple choice of choose your own adventures, but we are using the powers of computers, i.e., variables and calculations, in order to make the experience more sustained, more enjoyable, more engaging, more responsive. There is no, oh, I took a left, I'm dead, because that's not good game design. That's not a very fun story. I mean, the first time or two that it happens, it can be kind of like, oh, ha 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 ha.
Right.
But once you do it a couple of times, you're like, okay, that was not fun. Um,
Then you have to
so
read
we
with your fingers
use,
in all the pages, like Marianne.
yeah, and then you discover the places that you can't actually get to by
Right.
following the story. Yeah. Um,
Let me ask you
so
this.
yeah.
Sorry, if so, when I was first, I thought about pitching for Choice of Games, as Jason knows,
Mhm.
and we had an initial conversation. I admit I got a little bit intimidated by the idea that I would not only have to write many, many, many words because you have to write all the endings, guys. So you have to do a lot more writing than for a typical novel. Well, write all the paths, but also that I'd have to learn some programming. So
Mhm.
for the writers among us, maybe you could give people a sense, and Ben kind of reassured me that it wasn't really that much programming and not that difficult, but maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
I mean, Ben made everything much more difficult.
Yes,
That's
sorry.
because
Don't do it the way I did it. That's not that's not the answer to this question. You don't have to do it the
yeah,
way I did it.
you can have a very straightforward set of coding design, not game design, coding design, use of variables, use of choices, where it branches just a little bit and comes back together. You have set some simple variables, and you don't get too complicated, and it's totally doable. We certainly had writers that have picked it up. We've also had writers that really struggle with it.
Hmm.
It's I don't want to say it's a brain type or a personality type, but there are some people who have never touched coding before and they pick it right up. And there are other people who are, longstanding writers, and they just never quite get their heads around it.
Hmm.
Um, and that's the coding part of it, which is separate from the game design, because there's really three parts. There's the game
Hmm.
design, the coding, and writing. And the game design is a third skill entirely. And that's something that it's funny because we actually look for players of tabletop role playing games, because
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
you're a tabletop role playing person, you have some sense about how to create possibilities but also bring them back together
Hmm.
towards the next step in the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
I will say,
the
just as an outsider, I want to say that choice script is it seems to me very elegantly designed to minimize the amount of coding that you have to do. It's kind of a really stripped down, writing centric language. So if you're writing this in some other language, it'd be like lots of code and then you have the things you wanted to write. But this is basically like really your story with like kind of indented branches where it's sort of like, okay, this track goes down for a while, so it's indented, and then we come out again to the almost like an outline where it's like you
Mhm.
could kind of context, like metaphorically imagine it's sort of like bullet points. It's like it was like in bullet point one, the character is one of X things, and then there can be sub bullet points under that where you write those stories, and then you come
Mhm.
back after those bullet points to the top level of the outline. You know what I mean? That's kind of what it looks
Yeah,
like,
that's a great way of
and
describing
it's
it.
kind
Yeah.
of elegantly,
Yeah,
um, you know.
I
It,
think that makes sense to me. I'm curious whether like could I outsource the coding piece to my mathematician husband and like make him do that bit of it for me, or there's no reason
there's
not
no
to,
reason why
right?
you couldn't. Yeah.
Okay.
We
As
certainly
long
have had writing.
I would do the design part and like figuring out like like I do play tabletop role playing games and like that piece I got. It's the
Mhm.
yeah.
I mean, I will
No,
say there's just not. I mean, you certainly might be useful to have somebody with a mathy brain in house to come help debug, but it wouldn't even be that much outsourcing because it's not like there's that much. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe you'll
Yeah.
be like, hey, could you write a function that does this one complicated thing I want? But most of the time, it's just bullet point. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Okay.
you could do it very straightforwardly.
All right. Ben has
or
faith in
maybe
me.
you start with his help, and then,
Yeah.
a third of the way through, you're like, oh, I got this.
Right.
And then, ask him questions every once in a while. But
And
yeah.
I seem to remember when I was talking about pitching with you, you had said you had people who could help get me started on the coding, right? Like you don't just
Well, I
pitch people
mean,
into the deep end.
um, we
Also, I
definitely,
can help you. Come on, you want
Yeah,
to
I
run a
know,
choice?
no,
Yeah, come
but
on,
this
I'm
isn't. No,
here.
no, no, no,
What
no.
am I,
I know
chocolate liver?
you're here.
No,
I'm
I know,
mostly
I know.
I'm
I
asking for
mean, for other,
the
yes,
general
I get
public.
what you
Yes,
mean.
the general
Sure,
writer
sure, sure.
thinking about pitching.
Yeah.
yeah,
So
we do a choice script tutorial, which is, an hour and kind of walks you through the
okay.
basics. But then there's also, a full list of all the commands on our website. Then we have our very robust forums where you could go and search for answers to questions, but also pose your own questions. There is also, we do regular check-ins with the authors. So rather than writing the whole draft or half of a draft and sending it in, especially for the first couple of chapters, it's every chapter and then every 2 chapters for a while, so that we can, because we're trusting you to know the writing, but we're introducing coding in this programming language in particular and game design, and we're not expecting you to know those things.
Right.
And so we have to, coach you on that, and also
yeah.
transfer some received wisdom, right? Because and institutional knowledge, because there's a lot of pitfalls that first time interactive fiction, and particularly our version of it, can fall into. So.
Okay, that's great.
One thing, so among the things that attracted me to doing a choice of games title, one of them was that I read these before I decided to sign on the dotted line and dive in. I read some essays that Jason wrote, I think, that sort of talked about like the aesthetic, not it as just like here's a programming language and it lets you write stories and you can do whatever you want, but as kind of like that it's tailored around a specific model of what this kind of story looks like, which I found very interesting and attractive. And of course, being me, immediately like I wanted to break all those rules, but that's why it took 5 years. But I mean, what I love about it is this idea that there's several sort of conventions that form it. One is that like there's that like every way through is interesting, right? Like every way, like at every point you have a choice, but it's not like you're trying to get the right answer. It's not like one of these is the right choice and the other ones you suck. It's like everything, like losing is also interesting, right? Like the ending could be triumphant or tragic or whatever, but like it's always any path through this is going to give you an interesting novel, and ideally one that's on the one hand, and there's almost this magic trick where on the one hand it should be replayable in the sense that the second time through will be really different. Like you'll make different choices, it'll feel really different. And also without there being an enormous burden on you as an author, right? Because if you in fact have to have on every page a meaningful choice, and then every single one of those is a distinct story that you're writing, you're ending up writing 1,000 stories, and that, that's brutal. So there's a lot of cleverness in how it kind of uses different axes and things, sort of like in a way, it's partly like combinatorically combining orthogonal axes, but in general, like just sort of, and also the idea of delayed choice, Jason wrote a lot about, where it's sort of like you're doing stuff and it matters, but it's not going to send you off in a totally different direction. Like in The Ghost and the Golem in chapter 3, there's like a bunch of different investigations. You could go in the forest and learn mysticism, or you could go in the tavern and try to, talk to the soldiers. And then at the end of chapter 3 and chapter 4, you're always back at home having dinner with mom. So unlike a choice adventure book, like one of the old paper books where like you set off on a path and it's like a whole other story. It's like, well, no, you always come back, but those investigations are going to matter. Like what you've learned, what you've acquired, like the skills you've acquired, but also just like the information you've acquired, like this is going to then play out. So chapter 7, even though chapter 4, the beginning is always the same, you're back from the forest or from the tavern or from, the barn or whatever. But like, in chapter 7 and 8, it's going to matter a lot what you did in chapter 3, but it doesn't. Do you know what I mean? So there's this delay branching of like coming out and then coming back together.
So let me clarify that a little bit, because I think. So I've written 2 choose your own adventure books, except we weren't allowed to call them that because that's copyrighted, right? So,
right, sure.
And these were in my 20s when I was writing a lot of erotica. So I wrote these for Penguin. They were called Create Your Own Erotic Fantasy, which is not nearly as catchy, but what can you do? And I actually did do the kind of thing you're talking about, where, there would be various branches that would take you to different places and then would come back to what looks like the same place. I think so. We had those in the print books. I think.
Well, but the point is that the print book does not state.
I know. Hang on. Let me
finish
explaining, because
sure.
I think this is very not clear to anyone who hasn't played these. So So you can do this in a print book, but whatever different experience you had is entirely in your own head, right? In
Right,
that,
right. Yes.
whereas in the game, there are variables and consequences that
Hmm.
that fall from having taken path A versus path C versus path
Right.
E, right? So
Yes.
even though
And
it
that's a
looks
very
like you're
important
coming,
distinction. Yeah.
yeah, even though it looks like you're coming back to the same place in chapter 3 or 5 or whatever, you are now a different person, and that's going to affect what happens
Well,
later
and
in
not
the
only are you a different
game.
person, but your
Your
mom is
character,
mad at you or happy with you,
yes,
or you know what I mean?
exactly.
Like
Yeah. So
if you come back muddy, yeah,
yeah, the overall game
so,
state has changed, and I think
exactly.
that's a real difference from the print books.
But
There was
it's
no,
actually it's a great
yeah,
correction that you say because it is true, of course. I stand corrected. It is true, of course, that if you're talking about one of the old games and you come back to the same place, somebody remembers that's you, the reader. So it could
hmm
be quite informed by what you know,
sure,
but the book doesn't know.
but
Whereas
the
in
book
the
doesn't know.
choice of games title, like it knows. Like it's going. Mom is
hmm
either like, "Oh, wonderful, you're back for dinner," or she's like, "What the hell did happen to you? Why do you fall in the mud?" You know, those are very like the book
hmm
is actively aware of everything you have done on every
Right,
page, which is very different than like, "Oh, well, I remember that in chapter one I met this guy," but you know, the book's ignorant of that. Anyway,
right. Yes.
um,
No,
all I
and
was
and the
saying
kind
is, I think it's
and
a yeah,
well, I also want to start maybe clarifying the kinds of variables. So, so
okay.
for example, like the choice you made in chapter 2, do you open the door or do you not open the door? It's like very
Hmm.
simple kind of thing, might indicate whether you are brave or cowardly, right?
Hmm.
So, and then that's going to inform things. And
Yeah.
because I think if you haven't played, it's unclear, when you were explaining this to me, um, you had various character elements that you had focused on. So maybe if you could talk a
Yeah.
little about this. And I should say that the name of Ben's game, he mentioned it in passing, is The Ghost and the Golem. Maybe introduce that and the setting, and then maybe talk about this.
Sure. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
um, no, that's cool. I sort of want to. I mean, I sort of also want to like
Finish
the
what you
thing
were
I
saying.
was
Yeah.
feeling. I just
Yeah.
want to give back to Jason before but we should let's do this. I just wanted to say this, make this point about the aesthetic project, and see what Jason has to say about that, and then maybe we should talk specifically about the Ghost and the Golem as a case study, and also talk about like stats design, which I think is also very interesting in terms of the project. But I guess what I'm saying is one of the things that attracted to me about it was it had this notion of like this is how you make something that is this experience that has a lot of agency, that the reader is really just making choices that matter. There's there's one end of the spectrum of like visual novels where you're clicking your way through, but like maybe there's three or four like important differences, but largely you're just reading a text that's mostly the same. This is very much not that. This is very much like the second playthrough might be wildly different than the first. Um, and on the other hand, like has this coherence where it's not just kind of like a random set of things that are interacting generatively. It really is a story that you've written. It's just like a lot of them, but they're woven together in a way that I guess what I'm saying is a magic trick is that it feels very different without you having, you still have to write more, but it's not the way it would be if you were not using that, not leveraging that. Go ahead, Jason.
Um, to bring it to something that probably most people know, there's a board game called Hamlet, and it's where there's a card for each of the main characters of the Hamlet story. There's Hamlet, there's Ophelia, there's Laertes, the pair of messengers, Polonius, the mom, and you can each turn you get to manipulate something on one of their cards, like you know Hamlet practices his sword play, or Hamlet
Hmm.
goes and talks to the ghost, or the messengers go to England or they come back. And the thing is that everybody at the beginning of the story is given a different Shakespeare play that they're trying to achieve.
Mm.
And so the thing is that you're trying to push the characters on the board, the stats of the characters, so that maybe everybody gets married and everybody has a happy ending,
hmm
right? Or maybe you get the traditional Hamlet ending, or maybe everyone dies, or you get any of a variety of different Shakespeare plays that you could get with the basic setup
Hmm.
of Hamlet, if things just went slightly differently. And so that idea of all the different possible endings from the same starting point, and the way in which those endings then inform how we understand the story up and subsequently understand the story up to that point, I think is a really good metaphor for what we're doing more broadly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's really helpful.
So to your question about the stats and the Ghost and the Golem specifically, so the Ghost and the Golem is a Jewish historical fantasy game. It's set during the pogroms it's set over mostly over 3 days during the pogroms of 1881 in kind of a fictional Jewish village or mixed Jewish and Goyish shtetl on the border between like Poland and Ukraine, and it's got lots of magic. There's ghosts and golems, obviously, and demons and other things, and and one thing I was trying to do, and this kind of follows on my tabletop role playing game Dream Apart, which I wrote together with Avery Alder and published in 2018. Well, we had paired games. Avery Alder's Dream Rescue was the original inspiration for it, and the Dream Apart is like a fantastical game of the shuttle. And so this was kind of like when I started writing this, I had had done a lot of playtesting where a lot of different things, as to Jason's point about tabletop role playing games, it's like where lots of different possible things had happened in the magical shuttle. And so I wanted to have that project, and one of the pieces of that project was my sort of thinking about Jewish historical fantasy, Jewish history, and how it lands different, and how a lot of the sort of conventions and cliches of typical medieval fantasy, and also like role playing games, like how D&D, how I sort of both loved and also bounced off of D&D back in the day, and how and how it's kind of alienating from this perspective of like, we weren't the ones with the swords, right? So there's this lack of fit, and so one of the things I liked about Choice of Games is in terms of like the is actually presented a way of writing a story, a way of thinking about writing a story. I've always been a pantser. Took me 12 years to write The Unraveling, partly because I just kept throwing away huge chunks and starting over. I did not know where I was going. And the outline process with Choice of Games is very helpful to me in being like, well, you do actually have to write like what's going to happen at the end and these chapters, but not in necessarily, but because it's a story with a lot of openness, lots of things could happen. You're more sketching possibilities than you really are. You're saying, like, here's a bunch of things that could be different at the end, rather than saying this happens and then this happens. Yeah.
Can I pause for a sec there? So my experience of having outlined a novel is that it was terrible for me, right? Like when Ben uses the term pantser, he means by the seat of your pants, as opposed to a plotter who's writes a plot outline. And what my experience was is that I outlined the book, and then when I sat down to write it, I did write it, but it had drained a lot of the fun and energy out of it because I did an outline. I felt
absolutely. I hated outlining novels.
I was just coloring in the outline, and it was tedious.
100%.
So
yeah, and
a little more about why this is different. Yeah.
Well, you apparently, and your reaction apparently was to like nose to the grindstone and muscle your way through it. My reaction was just to keep throwing away the outline. Like I would write an outline and then I'd be like, no. I think it's the same impulse, but
I'd sold I had sold like my first big book contract to HarperCollins, and I was young and didn't realize that I was. Well, I didn't realize that I wasn't as held to the outline as I thought I was. Right.
Sure. Anyway, what I think is interesting, and of course I also didn't really, it's not like the outline of the Ghost and the Golem is exactly what ended up happening, but it was a sketch, and it was very useful. And I think what's useful is not necessarily even just the blow by blow, like chapter 1, chapter 2, which is very brief, but that the other part of the outline that's different from like a book outline where you're like, this is what will happen in each chapter, is that you are thinking about the possible range of characters, possible range of protagonists, right? Because it's not like you have a protagonist. You have the reader is invited to decide who this protagonist is. Are they daring? Are they dutiful? Are they a skeptic? Are they a romantic? Like, well, who are they? Because every playthrough they're going to be different, and that the what the person choosing is informing what this person is good at, what they care about. Is always going to be different. So essentially, it's kind of like a novel where there's this blank space in the middle where the protagonist goes, and the reader, like, of course, that happens with every book, but much more dramatically, in a very concrete way, the reader is really choosing who this protagonist is. And one fun way, if you're ever like, if when I go to play a choice of games title that I didn't write, a lot of times when I play through often like I this is what my son does too. I play through the first time as me. I just like what would I do, and then the second time through, I often pick like some character that I think would be like what would Elizabeth Bennet do? What would you know?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like some, or what would Iago do? Like just try to like see what and because if that's how dramatic it is that you can apply some different set of criteria, but the author has to understand how these characters vary. You can't just be anything. And so the way you do that is you conceptualize it, and this clearly, I mean, Jason can confirm, but it seems like it comes out of tabletop role playing, that you have a series of sort of stats, right? Like in a classic Dungeons and Dragons, you like strength, intelligence, wisdom. And so it's like, well, your character is going to have different traits based on how much of this they are, or how much of this they are, both in terms of competencies and also in terms of attitudes. And so I had to think about not just like what should happen in each chapter, but in this game, which is kind of like my homage to Yiddish literature, right? It's my homage to Shalom Aleichem and Ayel Peretz and uh, Isaac Bashevis Singer. What is what are those characters like? What if you were going to do strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, charisma for an Isaac Bashevis Singer protagonist? Obviously, those wouldn't be the stats, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the stats? Which ways are they heroic, right? And so in the end, I was like, what is it? And so I have this list of primary stats, which is like daring, careful, charming, learned, I'm forgetting my primary stats, but these are it's this very like just the list of stats is Jewish, right? Like just the list of stats is like evocative of Yiddish literature. It's like that, those are the characters, right? You have this irreverent charmer, and you have this like dour learned guy, and you have somebody who's like kind of a deep. You have this sort of innocent mystic. Like that's who you're gonna be. You have tricksters and fools and curmudgeons. Like that's who you have. You don't have like paladins and clerics and rogues, right? That's not, well, maybe rogues is an intersection, but you know what I mean? So so once you kind of envision the world, and then similarly, like the attitudes, like the attitudes very much situated them in kind of like this very 19th century milieu. Like, are they a rationalist or are they a mystic? Are they, are they traditional or are they dutiful or defiant? Are they like a traditionalist or a modernist? And that's very much because this is like poised on the edge of like the Industrial Revolution is happening in the cities. You could go off and be, writing communist pamphlets, but you're also like could be praying at the yeshiva. It's like poised on this edge of transformation. So by making not just like who is this character, but like who are all the ways this character could be, kind of enumerating them, for me as somebody who totally resists an outline in which this happens and this happens, it was very liberating to be like, oh, I'm going to tell like this polyvalent story about like all the ways that this character could be. Like there's a situation that the pogrom is coming, there are malevolent forces approaching your shtetl. What are all the levers you could have? What are all the resources at your disposal? What are all the things, and what would this irreverent trickster character do? And how's that different from what like this innocent sort of mystic would do, or this, curmudgeonly scholar, or this, bossy midwife? Like what they're all, or matchmaker, like the different vibes. Like they are like every different kinds of protagonists fit into this shape. And I guess that it rather than it being a strict outline of like this happens, the fact that it was like a field of play, I don't know, it kind of gave me a different way of approaching, the process of coming up with the story.
Jason, do you want to comment on that or?
Um, Everything that Ben said, I agree with. Although what's interesting about it is that's one of the things that authors have the hardest time with when they're coming from writing defined protagonists and letting go of the idea that there is only one possible protagonist that can be in this story. That's one of the hardest things that we have to work with authors to let go of. So it is a strength of the format. And if you can play on that field, then you can really succeed. And but if you're really invested in your character, your protagonist character, it's going to be a hard time to make
Mhm.
it work.
It's making me think of a couple different examples. I think it's interesting, Ben, that you like went to these characters out of fiction for other templates.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
as well, because when you first started talking about this, I was thinking like, okay, first you played through as yourself, then you played through
Uh-huh.
as your spouse. And like,
Sure.
what are the
That could
choices
work
they
too.
would
Yeah,
make,
yeah,
right? Or your,
yeah,
like, or your best friend, or,
yeah.
whomever. And
Hmm.
all the times it feels like that would be very emotionally easy to do in the sense that like, you'd be like, oh my God, I hate it when they do X. I don't know why they
Hmm.
don't just do Y instead. And then you've got to be like, okay, they're going to do X. Why are they doing
Yeah.
X? Right? Why is it that they respond this way? So, another thing I was thinking about is that you were talking about the shtetl and the pogroms and how people respond. And I feel like, oh, right now, you could just look at the internet in America and be like, oh, how are people responding to the Trump
Hmm.
administration? And I feel
Yeah.
like we have all of these case studies now among our friends and family of like, some people are head in the sand, some people are freaking the hell
Hmm.
out, some people
Hmm.
can't sleep at night, etc. And
Yeah.
then um, it also reminded me of when you talk about gaming strategies. So uh, one of the ways I think about things is whether people are um, conservative in this cautious. You termed it as cautious, but
Yeah. Careful. Yeah.
specifically in economic terms, I feel like it doesn't
Hmm.
always play out evenly. Like some people are
Hmm.
take risks in some places, but not others, right?
Sure.
And to bring a gaming element up, I don't know if you've both played Agricola.
Hmm. Sure.
Agricola resource game, farming board game, two-player
Yeah. You're a
game,
medieval farmer.
medieval farmer, and there's a mechanism in Agricola where if you spend too much money and you get into debt, you can, I can't remember what it is exactly. It's not starve your peasant, but something like that, right? Like there's kind of like a way you can deal with the debt. I played with my
Hmm.
college roommate, and it was hilarious because every time I play, I always get into debt. I always overextend. I take risks. etc. And I just like that's just part of the game. And she's like, huh, when my husband and I play, it was years later, they never come close to getting into debt. Like
Sure.
it's like, and they are both actuaries in their real life day
Hmm.
jobs, and like they are very risk averse when it comes to financial things. And it's just fascinating. It had not occurred to me that you could even play that way. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I don't know. And then the last thing I'll throw into the mix is I'm thinking about my students when they're doing character creation, because I had them like as a warm up do an RPG at the big start of the semester. And a bunch of them kind of latched onto neurotypical, neurospicy type traits as
Ah,
differentiators, right?
interesting.
So,
Yeah.
that they were like, well, my character is going to be on the autism spectrum and therefore is going to
Uh-huh.
act this way and this way and this way. And my character is, and I mean, I say this in class all the time. I have ADHD. I seek novelty. I'm easily, like I have a hard time focusing. So I wonder to what
Neurotypes as
extent.
alignments.
Well, that's what I wonder. I wonder whether, it's like when I was reading about ADHD a year or two ago and, ran across this thing that women with ADHD tend to be more sexually active. They use the term promiscuous, which I feel is a value judgment. So we're going to say sexually
Mhm.
active. And and it was very interesting because is that a character thing or is that a brain dopamine seeking thing, and is there a difference between the two? So I don't know, I'm kind of
Mhm.
like throwing that out there as a it was actually really disturbing to me because I had this moment of like, huh, here's this thing that I
Hmm.
thought was integral to my character and my personality, and now I'm like, and it's just my brain seeking dopamine. I'm like,
I mean, where
I'm
would your character be located if not in your brain?
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, you know, yes, but it's a little disturbing because you invest in an identity, right? So, And
Yeah, but also
people,
it's, I mean, well, this is a very, now we're in danger of a complete digression, but
sorry,
just
Jason, but
in
Jason, I'd
one, this
love to
has
know if
nothing to
Jason
do
has
with Jason
opinions
being
here.
here.
No, he's got opinions. Go for it.
Well, I mean, my opinion is that I was for the first time diagnosed with ADHD 6 months ago. So
Ah,
I'm like,
welcome.
yeah, I'm discovering all sorts of things about how my brain works recently. But
Yeah. Um, I don't know.
I mean, I
Maybe
just
that
think it's
may,
the thing. Well, to bring it back around, actually, to both answer your question and bring it back around, I think this speaks to the granularity of stats design in a way. Because my
mm,
reaction when you're like, "Oh, I'm going to play this character that's autistic," it's like, well, A, when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So it's like there's a way in which it's like a granularity thing where this is and the reason I said neurotypes as alignments is that lawful good in D&D is supposed to be this set of things that go together. And I'm like, I don't think those things go together. Do you know what I mean? Like that was always my problem with alignment is this very broad brush, like, lawful good. And I'm like, no, I don't know. And in a sense, it's sort of like, yeah, like on the one hand, yes, obviously our entire personality and character is entirely composed of things in our brain. Well, that's not entirely true. It's also our social world. It's entirely composed of our brain and then the mechanisms in our social universe that like reinforce the things in our brain. But like also not in some obvious reductive way where you can name
sure.
one neurotransmitter and predict somebody's behavior. Like your character is built out of 1,000 non-deterministic interactions, which yes are flavored by like a mix of neurotransmitters, but you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah, yeah.
like it's not because it sounds like you're saying, "Oh, I figured out I'm much simpler than I thought I was," and I'm not sure I actually buy that. Do you know what I mean? It's like
I think it was,
just because a lot of people had ended up in the same corner of the map, that
well,
doesn't
but
mean they're
I think
it's
it's
not a
more,
complex and
no, but I think it's more that I had attributed it to something different, right? Like, so I had attributed like me being poly, dating a lot,
yeah.
etc., to like reading Heinlein at a young age. And, like, I was exposed to these ideas and,
Sure.
it shaped my consciousness and approach and so on. I think I had thought of it as much more willed and decided, but, like things that I had
But
decided
in
for
a way, the
myself.
will, I mean, like reading Heinlein is not like the fact that you found Heinlein is also do you know what I mean? Like that's still an external,
Yeah,
like,
it's still you don't. I found it a little disturbing. I'm just speaking for
I guess
myself. I
saying
found it
is,
a
what
little
I'm saying
disturbing
is,
to find that there was a possible hormonal component that I wasn't aware of, right?
I
Just
mean,
like people
I know
who
I
who
get
yeah
that.
yeah
I'm not arguing with your experience. What I'm saying is when I picture little Marianne Mohenraj wandering through the library at 10 and being like, ooh, these books, and like hiding them under her sweater, like it's like, yeah, that's Marianne's brain in all of its amazing complexity and selfhood. Like the fact that the brain is made of, like the fact that that brain is like, this is exciting, whereas some other person who saw that might have been like, whatever, I'm going to the next aisle to read about horses. Like, do you know what I mean? Like that's that specific individual brain in all its glory, and it's not less you because it's made of matter. And maybe some things are predictable based on, you know what I mean? But it's still not that predictable. It still is a choice. You still decided. You can easily imagine somebody who, you know what I mean? It's also statistical. It's like, yeah, and there's some women with ADHD who are absolutely avoiding that part of themselves and definitely not sexually active, right? Because that's the choice they make. You know what
sure.
I mean? Like, is that nothing
Right.
deprives you of
I'm
your
not saying there's no
agency?
choice. I'm not.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. Anyway,
all
it's
right.
not really about
I
agency.
get
Anyway,
what you're
like.
saying. I get what
Yes.
you're
Okay.
saying.
Let's go back to the game.
I'm
Let's go
not
back to the
arguing
game.
with
This is maybe not
with
super
your
helpful
with
to
your shock.
Jason to choice of games design. Maybe it is. I don't know. But if you're thinking
What the
about,
the way I wanted to
I think
connect
that,
it
yeah,
was
the
the
reason
granularity of stat design
and
because
the reason,
essentially I think
yeah.
there is Go ahead.
Well, the reason I was bringing up the various examples is I kind of think these are all different ways of thinking about character traits, right? So
Yeah,
that
I
was
do.
why I
Yeah.
was throwing them out. So,
The reason the way I wanted to bring it back around is to say when the character's like, oh, I'm going to play this as an autistic person, it's like for me that's like first of all, I think there's a there. I don't think there's. I
mm,
think those things are real. I think there's some like, oh, this is. I relate to this because it speaks to me because I recognize myself in this, right? Like I
mm,
totally have that with that. But I don't have an official diagnosis, but I don't think I'm 100% neurotypical, and certainly I act ADHD. Like I'm certainly at least ADHD adjacent. And it's like, yeah, that resonates with me. That feels right. That has. But the question is also like, is that or do you want to model that as one skill or do you want to model that as like a bunch of them? Like there's
mm.
like like there's also like, like the, I don't know, you said like attracted to new, like novelty seeking, right? Like you could break it
Hmm.
down further. So that's
Sure.
a thing in the design is like, what are the interesting axes here? And to bring it
Yeah.
back around to the Ghost and the Golem, I actually originally envisioned daring and careful as an opposed thing. Like either you're more, if you're more daring, then you're less careful. If you're more careful, then you're less daring. And I
Hmm.
ended up sort of by both engagement with like how the structure of it works and talking to Jason and Becky and also another editor, and also in terms of like how Yiddish literature works, being like, no, those are distinct. You could be daring and careful, or neither. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, like a character could be extremely daring and extremely careful about it, or
Hmm.
like not particularly daring, but also not particularly careful. Like I decided to make them orthogonal as
Yeah,
opposed
yeah.
to like linked. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, where it's like, well, what do these natures or like parts of ourselves say about our us, and at what granularity, right? Like at like I'm like this part, but I'm not like that part, of this model or whatever.
So hopefully we've dug into the character stuff a little bit in a way that's helpful to people. And I'll note we should in the show notes we'll link back to the unraveling the episode we did about that because Ben was also if you're interested in more of Ben talking about character traits and he really took apart gender and reformed it in this kind of conversation in the unraveling. But I want to put that in the show notes, go back to Choice of Games. I'd like to ask Jason if he can talk maybe just a little bit. I don't know how you got into this project. I don't know where Choice of Games started. And maybe if you can just give us a sense of like what has been the trajectory of this project.
So, um, my business partner Dan and I we met on the first day of eighth grade,
Hmm.
uh, and we, played a lot of role playing games through eighth grade and high school, and we continued a campaign, through college with, whenever we come back. And then after college, he actually moved cross country and we had an apartment together. And while we had an apartment together, this was in 2003, 2001 to 3, he discovered a game called Alter Ego. And Alter Ego was written in like 81 or 83 by a psychologist. And it was sort of in the style of um, sort of in between a choose your own adventure and a parser game. This guy really did a very interesting job given the tools that he had at making a multiple choice game. And when you start playing the game, you're literally a baby in the womb.
Hmm.
And you make choices about whether or not you want to come out or stay in. That's the very beginning. And you go through your different life stages, and maybe you get married, maybe you get a job, and eventually you die. And at the end of it, as Dan likes to say, you really feel like you've lived another life.
Hmm.
Um, and you make lots and lots of choices over the course of this. There's all these little tiny vignettes where he'll paint a little scene. It's like two, maybe three choices, and then this vignette's over. Your first kiss, your first dance, your first, interview for a job, da da da. Um, and Dan put it up on a server in the closet right outside my bedroom, and because it was vaporware and nobody was doing anything with it, so he put it on the server and promptly forgot about it. Fast forward 2 years, I moved out to go to grad school, and he looked at the server and was like, "I'm having like tens of thousands of hits a month of
Oh.
people playing this game for free on
Hmm.
my server." And that kind of planted the seed, besides the fact that he was really in love with it, that kind of planted the seed of what was to come. So then, fast forward several years, we're on opposite coasts, and he and approaches this gentleman by the name of Adam. And I don't know if they immediately asked me. There was a fourth guy. Dan and Adam went to college together and did role playing games there. Um, and originally Dan was like, "Hey, Jason, let's do this thing. Let's, make multiple choice text adventures." And I was like, "Are you serious?" Um, and then, the great financial crisis hit, and the world fell apart, and my job evaporated.
Mm.
And I was like, "Hey, Dan, so about that thing that you were working on." And this was, November of 2009, and December of 2009, they released Choice of the Dragon.
Mm.
And they were already working on Choice of Broadsides, and I jumped in with 2 feet. Um, and Choice of Broadsides was released in like March, and then Choice of the Vampire Volume One and Choice of Romance were released in like August, and then it was just kind of off to the races.
And that was the one you wrote. The first Choice of the Vampires, first one you wrote, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And the other ones were all collaborations. I was the first like
Mm.
solo
Okay.
game,
Yeah.
and from there, um, makes within about a year, we decided to start formalizing, professionalizing things.
Hmm.
We formed a company, and um, it was at that point that I became a partner, and we have been uh, progressing steadily since. So,
So can you give a
yeah,
sense of like how, like, you don't need to have the exact numbers, but like roughly how many games have you guys put out at this point? And are there particular ones that are great entry points for people or that have been wildly popular? Like, what would you
sure.
just tell us about it?
Yeah. So at this point, we have actually three different labels, right? We have Choice of Games, which I sometimes refer to as our professional label. We have Heart's Choice, which is our romance, erotica, smut label.
Hmm.
Um, and we have Hosted Games, which I don't want to call it the amateur label. But it's closer to like the self-publishing label. Let's
Hmm.
put it that way, which is to say that sometimes it publishes amateurs, but it also some of our professionals, jump back and forth because it's unsupervised, shall we say.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, Across the three labels, we've had I think over 300 titles by this point in time.
Wow, that's great.
Um, as for good entry points, that first game, Choice of the Dragon, is still, very much inspired by Alter Ego with these short little vignettes, punchy writing. Um, you're a dragon, you eat knights for fun. And like, there's something very appealing about being a mystical, nearly all powerful being.
Hmm.
So that's a great entry point. There's another early game, early to 2015, early at this point, called Choice of Robots, which was like got one of the largest sets of press hits that we've ever had, and has been very well received over the course of the past 10 years.
Mhm.
And it's another good entry point, much more meaty than Choice of the Dragon. And there's a variety of others. Like there's a beautiful kind of shorter, like not longer than Choice of the Dragon, but shorter than Choice of Robots, which I refer to sort of as the IDOS of a modern game because it's um, does everything that I kind of want it to do, and it's called the
Hmm.
Eagle's Air, and it's a alternate history where Napoleon didn't lose at Waterloo, and things have gone a little bit steampunk, and it's shares IP with some written novels. Um, but it's another good entry point, I think. And then there's a whole bunch of other games, that we've released in the past 4 or 5 years that are great. But those three, I think, are all in very different ways good entry points to the form.
That's
I will
great.
I will just put a plug in for one that I particularly liked when I was fooling around and playing them when I was trying to get, understand the form. And I'm a big fan of Tally Ho, which is it's kind of like the opposite of what you're saying about Trace of the Dragon. It's very elegant and simple. And Tally Ho is very lush and like all over the place. And it's Worcester and Jeeves, right? It's
Ah,
like
nice.
a PG Wodehouse take in which you're a very competent butler or um lady's maid or whatever, and and you have this madcap, completely irresponsible young rich employer, and it's all these hijinks ensue. And what I that's an influence in the Ghost and the Golem, because I think it's very much told in a voice. A lot of the titles are kind of very transparent prose and very simple and it's like this is happening, and so which is very sort of game-like in the sense that you don't have something in the way of like just your
Mhm.
experience of concretely what's happening. But what I liked about Tally Ho and also the Ghost and the Golem is very much like this is very much a narratorial voice. It's very much
Yeah.
this. It's kind of this Wodehouse pastiche. It's this very there's a lot of humor in the telling of it. And that I think frames, the fact that you're kind of that's kind of a pleasure to dive into this literary experience that's like Wodehouse, and like, but you're inside it, kind of steering
Yeah.
um Jeeves. So
Yeah,
that's one that I
I
think.
really, when I read Ghost of the Golem the first time, I think the narratorial voice actually really reminded me of the narrator on Jane the Virgin, which is,
Oh yeah.
he was just a
Uh-huh.
great narrator, and it works so well for that TV show, and
Hmm.
because he's snarky, the humor really like comes
Yeah.
through, right? And he tells you just enough, and I don't know, it's awesome.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, I think possibly the Ghost of the Golem is the most overt. I mean, Jason, I don't know what you think, but it seems like it's probably the most over the top narratorial voice
Very much so. I mean, it's the only
so
one
far.
where like it really directly addresses the player
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
in a way that like Tally Ho has a very clear voice, but there's
Hmm.
no distinct narrator in any of our other
Yeah.
games.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah. Yeah.
no dear reader. Um, so
Yeah.
so to talk specifically about what you did with Ghost and the Golem, um, when you open the game and start playing, the narrator immediately gives you some choices. So if you could talk
Hmm.
about those, and I think this connects to like why your programming was more complex than other people's, perhaps. Um, so
Well, actually, I mean, in some ways, the opening is not all that unusual for a child. Some of the stuff in the
yeah, yeah.
opening, I kind of got more and more ambitious as time went on. But it opens in media res, like it gives you an overview, and the narrator is kind of sets the scene. But then it opens with you getting mud splashed on you by Tevye, the dairyman, who's driving by, which is kind of an
Mhm.
immediate. If you're familiar with the Shalom Aleichem, it's this very, you're kind of plunked into this world. It's very much this reference, like this scene setting reference. It's a cameo. You only see the back of Tevi. He never shows up again. There's a Sholem Aleichem character for like 2 seconds while you only see the back of his head. But anyway, and then you're immediately like either throwing an apple at him in anger or playing up your outrage to the market vendors or being like, why do we care? It's just, I just
Mhm.
have mud on my clothes. And that's, this immediately telling us about who you are, right? Or like it reminds you of something in the Talmud. Like it's immediately this thing of character. And then pretty soon one of the other things, and this is really a convention of choice in games, it's not distinct, is that there's a way that's sort of in the story of immediately determining like some demographic characteristics, right? So the one of the things that happens, it's like, oh, you still have a speck of mud on either your dress or your pants, and then that tells us your social gender in the shtetl, and then like the narrator is nosy, so inquires more, and you can in fact be trans or intersex tumtum, which is an intersex category from in Jewish legal tradition. And there's like a lot of like there's a whole lot of like gender and sexuality like richness, partly because I think that again, that's in the source material. I mean, Yentl is
Mhm.
a super transgressive story about gender, right? If you've only seen the Barbara Streisand movie, in the Barbara Streisand movie, it's very clearly like this girl who's discriminated against because they don't let girls study, so she just puts on a male disguise to be so she can study and gets into all kinds of romantic complications because of it, um, and ends up marrying a woman, and then runs off to America and where she can put her dress back on and still study because feminism. But like Isaac Bashevis Singer was like, why would Yentl want to go to America? Yentl loves the yeshiva, right? And in the
Mhm.
story, in the Yiddish, the pronoun switches as soon as Yentl becomes
Mhm.
Anshel. Anshul is referred to as he, and like it's a pretty trans story. Anyway, although and in fact, yeah. Anyway, but so there's this richness and this irreverence and this like this tension between like the richness of human experience and then these like strict norms which like sort of the community is normatively trying to enforce is really kind of the heart of Yiddish literature. So that and that's also very choice of games that having a diverse like there's it's definitely like an editorial direction that like you should be able to play at a minimum at multiple many various genders and sexualities. Like you can't just have it be a straight man, right? That's editorial fiat, which I was also attracted to. I mean, I think it's that also is kind of like a little bit of a flag in the sand.
Yeah.
I don't know, and maybe you could talk about that, Jason, about the editorial stance or like the how to
Yeah, I'm curious whether you get any pushback on that too. Like,
Well, so when we originally started Choice of Games, it was with an explicit feminist identity, egalitarian, feminist, and sex positive. Um, and so we decided that if you could be male, you had to also be able to be female. And similarly, if you could be straight, you also had to be able to be queer. And that was, which is not to say that, in a game where if your gender is never specified, that you have to specify gender, or if your sexuality is never specified, you have to specify your sexuality. But it was originally that statement. And then, sometime in 2018, we expanded that to be that you also need to allow non-binary player characters. And that is for the professional label, because we want, in the context especially of of an undefined protagonist, we want everybody to be able to play. That also, of course, does run into some problems. It does make certain stories hard or impossible to tell. Like one of the things that my partner Dan has always wanted to have Choice of Games publish is a story about like someone coming out as trans, but that doesn't fit within that rubric. Similarly, there were definitely people that objected to it early on, which is part of the reason why we created Hosted Games, because Hosted Games does not have that framework.
Editorial,
if you want to, so we have a lot of male-only games, and we have a few female-only games, and it's a playground where you can do whatever you want. But in the Choice of Games philosophy brand, we're trying, like I said, to make it so that anybody can find themselves in these stories.
Can I ask? I'm going to push at that a little bit. So
sure.
So with gender, it comes up immediately because of pronouns, right? Like so, but for something,
I know exactly where you're going with this.
So like race, or I mean, obviously, people who play D&D know that there's been some issues with how they handle race, much discussion over the years in the gaming community, but also other identity forms, like if I were going to write a story that had like that was accessible to all levels of ability, right? Like you could play as a blind character, you could play as someone who uses a wheelchair. Like there's just a lot of complexity and parameters there. So I'm guessing that you're not expecting people to write things that really could, without any translation, work for everyone. So on these other axes, right? So I'm just curious how you think about that. And
sure. It's funny because different games handle it in different ways. Like race is a sticky one, and a lot of games are written without explicit reference to race, whereas other ones you do get to choose your ethnicity, for example. And then if it's going to get that defined, then we want it to be handled very carefully, right? And similarly with regards to trans content, like we say man, that doesn't mean cis man, right? And so that in most of our games, we kind of leave it at that. But sometimes people want trans specific content. And if that's going to be the case, then, again, if you're gonna open the possibility of being explicitly cis or trans, then let's have it be very attentive to that.
Mm.
Um, if you want to write a game where you can be in a wheelchair, then absolutely. And if you're going to pay attention to that, we expect you to maintain that. Now, would every game make room for someone to be uh, in a wheelchair? Unfortunately, not. But yeah, it is not that every body type neurodivergent possibility is allowed,
Mm.
but um, we, you know, explicitly with regards to gender and sexuality, and as much as we can with regard to race, we want people to feel included as opposed to excluded.
That's interesting. I mean, like one of the games I was thinking about pitching to you way back when would have been, one set in kind of like an early South Asian culture, right? And so I
Mhm.
probably would have wanted to write it with no white people at all. They just wouldn't
Sure.
be
Right.
relevant. They wouldn't show up, right? So, and there probably would be some ethnic
Yeah,
language groupings,
I
but
feel like
within like so yeah.
I feel like gender does not work the same way as race in this. I think
Yeah.
we sometimes have like a Lego approach to being like, I should be able to just control, control F, like, search and replace like gender things with race
Hmm.
things. It's like that's totally like every human culture has had all the genders, like not
Yeah.
necessarily conceptualized them the same way, but like had people with various sexes and people with various desires and right, like conditioned by the culture. But do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
So
Like it's
yeah,
like
yes, but
you can expect anywhere to have, well, I mean, I suppose you could, no, I mean, you could want to write a story set in a, like, whatever.
well,
You,
I'm just thinking. So, like for yours, for Ghost and the Golem, right? There are
yeah,
arranged marriage pressures on your
yeah,
characters, but
sure,
within
100%.
within that cultural community, there would have been arranged marriage pressures regardless of your gender, right?
Yes,
And and
sure.
I feel like if I were writing a story that engaged with marriage in, I don't know, an Austen type thing, it would be very different for women than for men, right? And it would be
Well,
hard
and
to
that,
write that story in
so
a
one
way you could just flip, right? I don't
choice of
know.
broadsides. So are you going to say what they did in choice of broadsides? You can say.
No, go ahead.
So there is actually a like one of those early classic stories you mentioned is a very Austinian story. So there's
Mhm.
definitely like a like shipboard culture in the Napoleonic Wars where it's all only, like there's just one sort of gender person aboard, and then at home there's like definitely like drawing rooms and like it's a very gender dimorphic culture in which expectations of women and men are very different. But if you choose to be like basically the entire world flips depending on what you pick. You either
Mhm.
end up playing in a world where the women are all, at ship on shipboard firing cannons at each other, and the men are expected to,
Mm.
find a suitable marriage, or the other way around. Like, do you know what I mean? Like
Oh,
the
that's
whole
interesting.
thing just turns
Yeah.
on a dime, right?
Well, that's
Anyway, so
fascinating.
but
We have a
obviously
couple
it's a
of
problem. Yeah, go ahead.
no, well, we have a couple of games like that, and it's not a perfect solution, right? It
Hmm.
certainly doesn't do a great job with regard to non-binary individuals, but it also, it doesn't. It still makes very specific gender norms, and yeah, it's not a perfect solution. So we try to approach every game de novo, trying to think
Hmm.
about what's at stake, what's the story that's trying to be told, what are the values that we're trying to hold, how much editorial pressure is appropriate,
Hmm.
so everything is a negotiation in that regard.
Yeah,
And I think
what I
as
want to
a
say is, yeah,
no,
the
go
main thing I
ahead.
want
Go
to
ahead.
say is it is having that political stance of like inclusion, which obviously has to be is going to vary depending on what game. Like again, it goes in the Golem. You're definitely playing a Jew. Like there's not going to be a release where
Mm.
you're playing a Christian. That's what the story is about. But like but it's a but on the other hand, the Ghost in the Golem is set in a society with very different gender norms for men and women. Like it
Mm-hmm.
is not the same being a man and woman in the 19th century shtetl.
Right.
Like, and the fact that the game needs to have, because it's the editorial position, that the game needs to have like the protagonist has to have full agency and end up in all the possible
Mm-hmm.
places, just regardless of whether the shtetl genders them as male or female, like that is a creative constraint and actually
Right.
informed a lot of the way that the story is. So the reason that you have the specific class position you have in the Ghost and the Golem
Mm-hmm.
is precisely to allow that. If you were if in fact you had enough money that your family could send you to Shiva, then you would
Mm-hmm.
actually not have the same starting position as a boy or
Right.
a girl. The fact that one of the reasons that you're like your father's died and you're impoverished and your siblings both have apprenticeships, but you are like helping out. You're the one who's helping out Mama with her sewing business, is because that's the specific position in which a person historically in the shtetl would have in fact been doing the same stuff regardless of gender. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
actually very carefully crafted so that you can be, and the same things about queerness and transness. Like
Mm-hmm.
the game is sort of carefully arranged so that I can find someone who has this equivalent amount of agency in the same way. It's not like I could have just thrown a dart at a map and picked a random person in the shtetl and you could have swapped out their gender. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Yeah,
it
yeah,
has
yeah.
to be, you have to find your way. And so anyway, it's different in every story. And a lot of the games are more um uh there's kind of different ways to think about oppression in games. And one way is to have like utopian setting in which we don't care, which we have a sort of liberation around. You know what I mean? There isn't this oppression, and that's kind of fun. But the Ghost of the Golem really wants to look at these oppressions, all of them. And so, it's very much a world in which it is like there's sexism and homophobia in 19th century Russia. And what
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in is what agency did people actually have historically, as opposed to like making a wish fulfillment. It's a little bit, I mean, obviously I'm pushing, I'm making it's a story,
Mm-hmm.
so there's some fun with it. But like to some extent, I really want to look at like I really want to um,
I mean, and this is
imagine, yeah.
well, I was gonna say, I mean, this is anytime you have a fictionalization of a historical time period, right? I mean, you have to make those you have to think that through, right? You have to decide, like, if I'm writing a novel, not Choice of Games, just generally a novel about fifth century Sri Lanka, which I'm working on, I have to think
Mhm.
like, how sexist do I want it to be? Do I want to try and figure out what was accurate to the time? Or is this a fantasy version? There are going to be dragons. So, like maybe I am okay with widening some possibilities, and so, it does make me wonder, like, within South Asian culture, there's this, um, there's a group, the Hijras, which is a different kind of trans than American trans.
Mhm.
And
Sure.
like, not to get into it in detail. And I'm just thinking, like, if I were going to include a Hijra character, I would feel the need to do a lot of research to be sure I
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
misrepresenting, right?
Sure.
Because I don't have lived experience of it. So
Yeah.
it's funny, like the things that I feel like I'm totally willing to be flex about. Yeah, of course there were queer people in fifth century Sri Lanka, and I'm gonna have a female captain of the guard who has an affair with, one of the
Mhm.
princesses. No problem. But a Hydra, oh wait, I've got to go and research this so as to not do harm, right? And so, Jason, maybe do you
Well,
have
and
thoughts?
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I mean,
Yeah.
in particular, we struggle a lot with these questions, and
Mm-hmm.
of you know a lot of the games that we've published in the past 5, 6, 7 years have been second world games.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're very closely inspired by certain times and places, but they're second world so that we can make it more utopian,
Yeah.
has been the saying. Um, if you're writing a game that's specifically about oppression, then we can go in a more,
Right.
straight on manner.
Historical. Yeah.
But a lot of our games, people are trying to write something that's kind of there's a story that they want to tell that's fun, and that's not, we're not talking oppression. The discussion of oppression is not the purpose of the story, and so making it in a second world can efface a lot of that.
Yeah.
But similarly, people have very regularly pitched us like World War II games, and or we just don't want to touch that right now, because there's no good way to tell that story right now. And so there are just a variety of moments in our history, like American history is also really fraught. And it's very hard for us to consider any game about American history right now.
Although you did write a game that's set in the Civil War, right?
I mean, I'm up to
Anyway.
the World's Fair, 1904 World's Fair. Yeah, and so I'm leading into World War I right now. But regardless, I started that game 15 years ago. So
yeah.
I mean, no, it's politically complex, and I think it helps to have some distance, right? 5th century Sri Lanka, people are not so invested necessarily. World War II is still in living memory, right? So so I think that affects things. If one thing I meant to get to earlier, and I just want to be sure we're at an hour 15 or so, and I want to make sure
we should maybe take a little break and let everybody get a drink and come back.
Yeah, actually, so when we come back, I'll tell you a couple questions I have. One is, Ben, I'd love you to talk about the use of Yiddish in yours, because I think that's very interesting. And Jason, I would love to discuss if someone is interested in pitching for you, what other things should they be thinking about? How many words should they be prepared to write? Etc. Right. So
and I do want to, when we come back, I also want to add the what dovetails with that conversation we were just having, and particularly in your reaction of like, yeah, queer 5th century is fine, but like the trans thing, I'd have to do research. I actually think I could probably tell the story about how I fucked up trans things.
Okay.
and did an update, and the amazing, terrific support I got from the forum, the Choice of Games forum, where I had this amazing dialogue with a lot of the trans players, and like it super informed the 1.1 version of the story. Anyway, so
when we come back, we're gonna take 5.
We'll go get a drink,
and
take 5.
We'll be back shortly.
Hello, my name is Pete Jelly Clark, and I'm a writer of speculative fiction. Locus remains an important part of the science fiction and fantasy community, not only in its support and recognition of genre creators, but also by informing us on the latest related news, books, films, interviews, and everything genre related. Join me in supporting Locus today.
The Locus 2025 fundraiser is live now with a ton of great donor rewards. Check it out by going to locusmag.com and clicking on the fundraiser banner at the top of the page.
Okay, we are back with Jason Hill of Choice of Games, and we are also briefly going to bring in Connor Nevitt, our producer on this podcast, who it turns out is a fan. Connor, you want to tell the audience about it?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I've done stage electrician work for a very long time, and I've often had to travel very long days. And during like the setup, it's very busy, but on our show days, there is an incredible amount of downtime, unless something goes terribly wrong. So I would spend, maybe 5 hours of like while the actual show is going on, just reading through Choice of Games. And like I very much, you mentioned Choice of Robots like very early on in the episode, and that was definitely one that I had replayed over and over and over just because of the sheer paths that you can go down.
Sure.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm so glad to hear that.
And Connor is one of my former students, so he's going to be very interested to hear about how one pitches Choice of Games and other details along those lines. So we will come back to that. But Ben wanted to finish his.
Well, I just wanted to, the apropos of everything we were saying about working with identity and like getting it right, and like if you go there, you got to go there. I dove in the beginning, giving you a lot of different options for being a different kind of character. And essentially, this is, you're in the shtetl and you're young, so you have been assigned a gender by the shtetl, and it is whatever they think you should be. And in the case, which they're actually, the shtetl is in some ways more progressive about intersex conditions than the world that I grew up with in 1980s America or 1960s America. So, like, one of those options is that you're a tum-tum and you've been raised as a woman or as a boy or girl because the rabbi said that, that was okay. But it is like kind of a separate status that's acknowledged as a real thing. But also you can be trans, but if you're trans, you're essentially maybe out to your friends. And uh and so and what's interesting is I put a lot of effort into making that feel very rich and like vivid in all these interactions. Like whenever you're reflecting on yourself, whenever you're talking to your friends, and that there would be this whole like that would be real. But then, funnily enough, and at the end, I like didn't have that many. I didn't have a very clear picture of how I could square the circle of like realistically having you like transition in the 19th century, and and I kind of kept putting it off, and then we ended up sort of shipping with me having kind of a somewhat stapled together solution, and I got a lot of pushback on the forum from trans players who were like, this is worse because it's really vivid and it really does feel like you're playing a trans character, but one that just never gets to, be who they are, or even try, or even like be honest about it to their like the arranged marriage spouse if you end up with them or whatever. Like it was just, and so I was like, this was sold to me. Somebody said this was sold to me as a game of trans joy, and it's a game of trans anguish. Do you know what I mean? Like, and and so that was really fascinating. It was a great conversation, and it was great that this forum was very available. Like you never have that, you know what I mean? Like in publishing books or even role-playing games, even things you Kickstarter, like there wasn't like I haven't had that experience of having this like immediate feedback of lots of people who are playing it and commenting and being able to change it. You publish a novel and you want to change it, that's a second edition. But this was like, oh, I can do an update. Like, so tell me what you think, And so there was this whole dialogue about it. And what I sort of realized, I mean, it sort of seems obvious in retrospect, but what I think because it's not, I think that in fact I was able to really, because I'm a cis queer guy, I was able to pull off like it really feeling like the 19th century and yet having all this possibility for queer life in different ways, the Boston marriage, the, running off with the klezmers, and because I had vivid and nuanced imagination, so that felt like something that could. Whereas I think what I got choked on, because it's not my identity, is that I was like, well, I don't want to be mean to them, so I don't want anyone to turn them down, but also I don't want to make it like super easy because then it feels like I'm betraying this sort of historical, not just in the like it has to be historical realism, but like I'm dishonoring generations of trans people who went through the struggle. If it's like, and what I actually got when I talk to the players is, oh, it's a game. It's okay with them if it doesn't always work out. Like, it's okay if it's hard. Like, if it's kind of semi-realistically hard, like in the 19th century, like it can be a victory condition. They want agency. That's what the game is about. They want to try. If they like tell their arranged marriage spouse, like, actually you're marrying a man, it's not the case that it always has to go well. It's not the case that the arranged marriage specificity, of course, I have no prejudices, but it can depend on how they put it and what they do and who this person is and what they've established. And if the person has fallen in love with them being a radical daredevil, maybe that's different than if the person is expecting them to be dutiful. And it's possible for the game to be like, well, actually, if you choose like very normative, like if you want to marry up and stay with your family and stay in the shtetl and have everything, then maybe there's not so much of an ability to transition. And if you if you're running off with the klezmers, then why the hell not? And and kind of you can see what really was, and maybe there is in the shtetl because maybe it is a thing in which you have enough social capital and people are like yeah, you're eccentric. I mean, so it was just like all of a sudden there were like many possibilities instead of my feeling like it has to be one thing or the other, like because I had all and people were telling me how they played. they're telling me, yeah, I tried this and I tried this and it still didn't work. And I was like, oh, I see. You're experimenting with different options and they can go differently. So it was, I was really happy with what I ended up with and the feedback. And then I was able to actually, so this is very nice. This level of feedback is very nice because I was able to then put it out and have people go, yeah, that's what we were looking for, and that was, it's a great learning experience, and experience of repentance. I put it out during Elul, just in time for Yom Kippur. So it was my repentance for having fucked up. But, it was I think it's kind of an object lesson in like, how, I mean, obviously it would have been better if I'd discovered this before shipping. It's not that we didn't even have any trans testers, but it just, I think it doesn't, I think maybe they were being too nice. I don't know. Like, I think it took it coming out and having that thing, but it would have been nice to have discovered it earlier. But anyway, yeah, that was, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Oh, and I want to say one more thing, which is once I started having ideas, then I got more ideas. And at some point I was like, wait, you could have acquired magic. If you've acquired magic, then you could be like fluidly, you know what I mean? You could just be sort of glamoring, transitioning back and forth. And that's a kind of a cool, like magic way of, like a fantastical take on it. Anyway, yeah, you were saying.
Well, I really appreciate the update as an option. I've often wanted that for my published fiction. So I think that's great. I guess I'll throw this out as a question. It's something I've been struggling with in my fiction, right? So I write a lot about little people, ordinary people in war settings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that has come up is, if I'm representing violence, often war contains sexual violence and rape, sexual assault, various versions of that. And I think there's people are exhausted. Women are often exhausted in particular in how much of that shows up in stories.
Sure.
But I hesitate to leave it out because it feels dishonest. It feels like I'm, then sanitizing or something the experience. And I'm curious, Jason, I don't know whether this has come up in any of the choice of games stuff. If you have thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them.
Well, the first thing is that the player character cannot rape or commit sexual violence. That's just a hard and fast rule that we have.
Right.
We also won't subject a player to rape or sexual violence. It's hard enough when you're reading about a protagonist, but if you're imagining it as yourself, like that's now, could the protagonist have been raped in the backstory, told responsibly, appropriate content warnings? Okay, we can talk about that. That's an open conversation.
Or possibly witness like another character, right? Not a
again, if it happens more than once in the story, I feel like there's a problem. But if it's somehow really relevant, then but a lot of our stories are not about little people. Let's put it that way, because a lot of our players want a power fantasy. And in the context of a power fantasy, you're not, it's a different scale. You're dealing with leading an army, not with dealing with bandits coming into your home. And so there's just a way in which we don't have to deal with that question very often.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I'm thinking in fantasy novels, like the one that jumps to mind is Elizabeth Moon's Deed of Paxenarian, where she has this female paladin character, and spoiler, like in book 3, she is raped as part of it. She's definitely the lead, chosen of God, power, like totally, and I think Moon handles it really well in that book. But it's a tricky thing to pull off, and it's not something that most writers even attempt. I feel like there's another sci-fi one I'm blanking on the title right now, that handles it well. And it's not that I don't think choice of games needs to go there. But it's just something I was, if I were going to be, well, this is again like World War II, like if you wanted to write a story about the Korean comfort women, like that's just a huge, like, that's about sexual violence, right? And so it sounds like there are certain stories that are, not so much what choice of games is focusing, right? And you
Very
don't
much
have
so.
to,
I mean,
and you don't have to tell every kind of story. There's no obligation, right?
right.
So,
I mean, if you wanted to
There's
write that
also,
story
yeah.
for hosted games, then go right ahead. But for choice of games, are we going to fund a story about Korean comfort women? I mean, that's not what our audience is looking for. That's not like there's no power fantasy there. And so anyway, yeah, it just the format doesn't work to the content, in my opinion. What are you gonna say, Ben?
I mean, I will say that The Ghost and the Golem is pretty on the low end of fantasy, of power fantasy. I will say you are a little person, although you can get magic powers and like have a golem and stuff. So it's not a power fantasy, but it's definitely, it's definitely. I think it is on the, and I think it is on the on one end of the scale, right? In the sense that there is a lot of, I mean, not about that particular shit. There's no sexual violence in the Ghost and Golem, but like there is a lot of like you can lose, and it can be, it is, and it's interesting that actually happened in rewrites to some extent because I realized I was pulling my punches. Like there was a way in which, kind of like I got to the end. The game actually it only took me 4 years to first think I was done, and then there was a go round in beta, and Alethek Knight, the terrific beta tester, and some others kind of gave me the feedback of like, oh, this feels like it kind of trails off, like the ending wasn't right. And when I went back, I mean, there's a bunch of things I needed to flesh out, and that I was kind of trying to land the plane too quick. But one of the things was that I decided I really like I had been kind of avoiding, partly because it's hard for me to look at, the like what happens if you don't save the shtetl, and that just seemed grim and bleak, and I didn't want to go there. Now I actually, when I actually like had some distance from it and went back to it, and I was like, well, you can make this like even if you lose in the large, you could win in the small. So you could be trying to say, like, yeah, the Stettl's screwed, but maybe you could save your brother who's wounded. Maybe you can like get him out of there, or maybe you can at least, I don't know, bury him. You know what I mean? Like it's like there's some like even like you can fight all the way down, I guess.
You can still have agency even if you
have
lose.
agency even if stuff is going to shit. Like you don't have to give up, and that in itself is kind of a powerful thing. And in some ways, I ended up liking a lot of that writing. Like in some ways, I think a lot of people play and they figure out how to win, and then they never see like abject failure. And I'm like, actually, some of the best writing is abject failure. So if you play the Golem and Golem and you've never had the shuttle be destroyed, maybe do worse because it's kind of good. There's some interesting stuff there. So anyway, but that is not necessarily what the average choice of games player is looking for.
So that's a good transition. I think we were going to come back and ask you, Jason. So if someone is going to pitch to you, what would you tell them? Like, what are you looking for? What kinds of things do well? Anything along those lines. How much should they expect to write?
Sure. The minimum word count is 150,000. That includes the code, but successful games tend to start from like 250,000. 150,000 can certainly be successful, but you're on some level selling yourself short. Choice of the Dragon's only 23,000 words, and it's hugely successful, even 15 years later. So what are we looking for? I'm open to a variety of different the genre is not really super important. It's the choices, right? And what you're going to be choosing between, with a certain skew towards power fantasy, right? So I was talking with I don't know if he was Puerto Rican or something like that, but someone who writes sort of magical realism with a Latin bent, and he was, asking me about writing a game, and I was like, look, write me Harry Potter, but with Latin, creatures, chupacabras and La Llorona and all these things, and put them in a high school, and let's get that story. And he's like, that's a pretty fucking idea. Um, you know, whatever. So, ex, magic schools do well. Vampires do well. Werewolves do well. Um, Anything, traditional genre fiction in that regard, Dungeons and Dragons does well.
Mhm.
But on the flip side, something like spies tends to be very hard because you might have a power, but you're supposed to not tell anybody about it. And we've tried to do spies several times, and it's fallen flat a lot. Whereas like a heist, that might work. That can potentially work, although there's different challenges there. But very small, as you were saying, small person stories, I might find that compelling. I like a certain bureaucracy sort of story, but there's got to be something that makes it not takes it up a level. Like we have a story where you are a social worker, but you're a social worker in a world where the vampires and the werewolves are fighting over territory, and the wizards move the ley line that change the border where the vampires need to be and where the werewolves need to be, but the formal zoning agreements don't line up with where the ley line now is. And so how do you negotiate between all these different mystical factions? And sometimes you solve the problem by filing false paperwork, and sometimes you solve the problem by beating the werewolf or the vampire into the ground. So that sort of breadth of choice in the context of a bureaucratic story can work. But yeah, so as long as you have good choices, I'm very curious to hear what you have to pitch.
Yeah. And I just glanced at your website to check what the process was. So for the games that that you're just hosting, people can just download the choice script, learn how to do it, put them up. The ones that they're pitching to you, it looks like you want published authors to then send you a CV, and then if you're interested, you'll get back to them and invite them to pitch. Is that correct? Did I read that right?
Yes, we try to get back to you. I mean, we'll ask for a writing sample within a week. And the CV is, if you have any sort of writing experience, you're going to get by. Do you know what a CV is? Because a lot of people don't, and that can just be a basic filtering mechanism. And then we want to see an example of your prose fiction writing, because we can't teach you how to write. And so we need to know that you can spin a yarn. And if you can do that, then the next step is what are the concepts that you want to pitch us? People say, do you give us the ideas or do we come with the ideas? And it's like, I could give you an idea, but if you're going to spend 1 year, 2 year, 3 years writing 250,000 words, you got to love it. And if I give it to you, there's no guarantee that you're going to love it. So you come up with something that you love, but that you're not too invested in, right? Because it's going to get banged around a lot. And come up with a concept, and you send it to us, and we look both at what our current slate is, but then also at the quality of the pitch itself, of the concept, because sometimes the concept says that you don't really understand what we're getting at, and other times it says, I totally get it. And sometimes it says, I sort of get it, but we need a little massaging. And ideally we pick one, and then we start the pitching process, which can be long and grueling or sometimes fairly quick. So it is, there are a lot of steps to the process just to getting to the start line, as it were. But we try to be pretty systematic about it.
And I know Ben wanted to just review
Well,
like the payment
I will just
structures
say,
and so
yeah,
on.
I will just say that the contract is really writer friendly. I find that
Hmm.
it's that was one of the things that attracted to me is the fact that it's because a lot of work in like the game industry is more like work for hire. But this is actually a kind of more like a novel contract where you get an advance and you also, own the IP as distinct from the like if it didn't use the engine. And and also the fact that it's in installments is, I think, actually a kind of a nice, like, reduces risk on both sides. You kind of like turn in a chapter and get paid a portion of the advance for the chapter, which I liked because it was kind of like, and I think is makes a lot of sense because a lot of people will be, this is the first thing they've done in the medium, and they're like, I don't know if I can do this. And so staging it like that, where it's like, well, we'll pay you a little for the outline, we'll pay you a little for the first chapter, and so on, and it culminates into an advance. That seemed very smooth and very, very writer friendly, very sort of like, we're both trying this out, let's see how it goes. Yeah, so that I think that's that was something that I mean, I've, been doing this long enough and looked at enough contracts that I was like, this is a good one.
Hmm.
So,
That's
I'm glad you
great.
find it so. We've definitely worked on that for many years. So
Yeah, that was my impression too when I looked at it. I think that, I probably would have pitched to you back then, except I kind of looked realistically at my life at that moment. I was like, oh, I don't actually have 2 to 3 years to spend on this project right now. So we'll
sure.
wait. And possibly, my kids are like going off to college now. So you may be hearing from me.
Yeah.
So um, um, I
You
want to
know,
make
it's
sure oh, go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say it's funny because there's a way in which our process works really well with like adjunct professors,
Hmm.
mm,
in that if they might, be the teaching semesters, but they've got the summer kind of
Hmm.
free, and they have like blocks of free time, and so they're not necessarily professional writers in the sense that they're trying to make a living just from writing,
Hmm.
but they have a job, they want to supplement their income, they're, used to writing to deadlines or something along those lines,
Hmm.
to specifications, and that can work. That has worked very well for certain people in the
Hmm.
past. Um, Whereas if you're trying to write full time,
Hmm.
it can be a little harder. So
Yeah.
anyway,
No, that's great. That's helpful, I think. And I also want to make sure we came back to Ben and had him talk about the Yiddish choices that you give.
oh,
So,
the Yiddish. Okay, so that's another odd and innovative thing about the Ghost and the Golem, is it's very much in this world of sort of, it's very much a game rooted in this particular moment in history, and I had a lot of fun, you know, doing a lot of research and figuring out a lot of stuff, and also just these stories like the Isaac Fisher Singer and the Wise Men of Helm and all this stuff that I partly grew up with and partly discovered later. Um, I wanted this flavor of it, and what I ended up doing, and this is I think we've mentioned this before in the podcast. It kind of dovetails with some conversations that have come up around in the genre around like how much dialect, how accessible does this need to be a broad audience, and how much can it be rooted in and partake of this very specific cultural experience. And the nice thing about choice of game title is you can kind of have your cake and eat it too, because you can just ask the reader, how much Yiddish do you want, right? And in the beginning, it kind of sets like, it started out as 3 levels. There's essentially now almost like a fourth level, because you get to first of all, you get to pick whether you want, like, bring on all the Yiddish, I'll figure it out, I'll look in the glossary, or if you want a smattering of Yiddish, but sort of like explained in context, like each time the word comes up for the first time, a new word, we kind of like include what it means one way or another. Or if like you just want the completely white bread, uh, like every bit of the shtetl has been scraped away version, and people say goodness instead of oi. Which is kind of like, I'm almost like, I find that level kind of hilarious because I wrote everything in very, like, then they sound like awesome characters. Um, and then in addition to that, when we went through process of we were originally talking and about once I had turned it in and we were kind of tweaking, um, I think I think Dan was the one who said, like, I think some readers still may be lost. So I
Mm.
actually introduced I added another thing, which is at the time that they ask you about the Yiddish, you can also be like, I don't know anything about this culture. Can you just give me a lowdown? And then there's this like essentially this choice tree, which is like me writing an encyclopedia of Jews, where
Hmm.
which was lots of fun, but it's sort of like, how did the Jews get to Poland? Like, what's going on?
Hmm.
What are the different kinds of anyway? So there you like I get to there's a whole like crash course before you even start the game if you want that. So that's like level 4 of like I really know nothing, explain everything to me. But anyway, so it ends up being it's a very steerable experience. And I've had a couple of people say, like, I'm working my way up through the levels of Yiddish. Like I started on level 2 and now I'm going to do a playthrough where I'm like, bring on the Yiddish,
Hmm.
which is kind of hilarious because I didn't expect. I mean, just to be clear, it's not like whole, like occasionally a sentence is Yiddish, but largely we're talking about like whether it says like Schlemiel or whatever. Like sometimes there's like little individual proverbs or whatever, but like mostly it's just smatterings of words. But there are words that in some sense are untranslatable. So it's like you could kind of write a little essay about them, but like in context they have a whole different feeling. Um, but anyway, the language choice script does that in a really elegant way. Like there's a very um, compact, simple syntax for basically saying in the middle of this paragraph, I'm just going to inflect this particular word and have 3 different versions based on a variable. It barely breaks your writing flow. You know what I mean? It kind of
Hmm.
like is just like you string the three of them together with like vertical bar characters in between them, and it's a very elegant mechanism for doing that kind of thing. Much more so than in a general purpose programming language, it would be a lot of extra boilerplate. So it lends itself to that. And yeah, it just in the context of these conversations that have been popping up in the genre about like, do you turn off readers by it's just kind of hilarious that I was able to cover all the bases.
It's really interesting to me that you did that. It sounds like a lot of work. And what comes up with my students often it's Spanish, just given
Hmm.
where I teach, and some of them are fluent in Spanish, but they're writing in English, and
Hmm.
they're writing immigrant-y kinds of stories, and they're deciding how much Spanish they want to include and
Yeah.
how much they want to explain for the reader and for their classmates who are critiquing their drafts and so on. It would be
I mean,
nice
it's
if they
funny
could
because
just give that option of like,
whenever I
here's, yeah,
describe this, people say it sounds like a lot of work, but it felt like less work because
yeah,
really it's like if your students could just write the Spanish and then like put a colon and write the English next to it and rest assured that whoever wanted to read one would read the one and if they wanted to read the other, they'd read the other.
yeah,
Like you save so much time in agonizing. Like the actual
yeah.
work of like writing the English after the Yiddish is very little, and the time saved in agonizing about whether you're overwhelming people with it is like, you know what I mean? Like that's it's
It really,
I
and
think it was much easier actually.
yeah, it makes me wonder, like, Nala Hopkinson, we have a interview with her on the SLF
Hmm.
site where we're talking with her about her use of dialect. And I know
Yeah.
we've had conversations in the past with Toby,
Also,
what's Toby Bacal,
Akel.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Who also writes from a Caribbean background. And like, I remember
Hmm.
Toby on a panel was once saying that you put in, when you're representing dialect, you put in like 10% in
Hmm.
fiction of what the
Yeah,
actual spoken dialect would
sure.
be so that it's comprehensible to someone who isn't familiar with it. And I'm like, God, it would be
Hmm.
great if you could just write it the way you talk and
Sure.
then have the translated option essentially, right? Like
Yeah,
as
yeah,
being a
yeah,
smooth thing. I don't know, Jason,
yeah,
if you have any thoughts you
yeah.
want to throw into
But I
that.
mean that it's again, it's what he's talking about is, I mean, it's not like it's all Yiddish. Like even if you turn
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yeah,
most
yeah,
Yiddish,
yeah, yeah. No,
it's
I
just Yiddish
understand.
words. It's still anyway. But yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I really appreciate what Ben did here because he really pioneered something. And I don't remember, right around the time that Ghost and the Golem came out, we published both a Persian flintlock
Hmm.
Second
Hmm.
World game and a contemporary Chinese magical realism real world game. I don't
Yeah.
remember which one it was, but one of them took Ben's function and used it to either sub in some Persian or sub in some Chinese, like actual Chinese characters. And so this is going to be now a tool sort of in our toolbox going forward for people writing certain types of games. So thank you.
I wish I was fluent in Tamil or Hindi, or, like it was, if I was fluent in any other language, that would be great. But I'm just like, there's a vast audience in India, and it would be really nice to be able to reach the Hindi speaking audience.
I mean, again, I don't want to overstate my Yiddish. It's not like
no. I'm saying,
I'm
saying,
but yeah,
that's the mechanism. But I'm just saying, like, if I were fluent in Tamil and I could write my whole game in Tamil and release that as an option, that would be awesome. That would, I assume Jason's in favor of making a lot more money with a lot more people able to read the game. So
absolutely.
We are now
there hasn't ever been, I mean, that's a question I have. Has there ever been any, because this is just, again, this is just like salting it, but has there ever actually been localization? Like, has there anybody ever considered writing a game that like you'd release bilingually, like that, the entire game?
Yes, very much so. We, in fact, did a translation of Choice of the Dragon because it's short, because it's 23,000 words.
Yeah.
And so you can play the Spanish version,
nice.
Both in the omnibus and in the downloadable app.
Yeah.
But it is very expensive to translate.
Yeah.
You end up paying more for the translation than you do for the base game. And when you get to 100,000 words,
right.
Even 7.5 cents a word, it's astronomical. So
but if the author were fluent and wanted to do it as part of their project,
we've had that conversation. Like, we have this one particular gentleman who's he's English, but he's fluent in both Japanese and Spanish because he's lives and works in Japan, but he's also between England and Spain growing up. And he was like, can I self-translate my games? And it's like, it's a lot of work on our end to implement the multiple language sort of thing. So it's sort of like, for the right project, yes, we could do it. We have the technology, but we would not be just on a lark. It's not that flip switch sort of thing.
Yeah. Also, I will say, I mean, this is just go ahead.
I was just, to go back to things that we're looking for or how to prep for pitching us. One of the best things you can do is play a lot of our games. Not only play a lot of our games, but also go onto our forums and look at the works in progress and see like sort of what's most popular. And those you can just play the demos of games that are being written and see like what thread has the most engagement. What is the game that people are responding to? What sorts of things are they saying about it? That sort of market research is a good use of time before you, as you're thinking about what you want to pitch to us. But anyway, you were going to say
well, I mean, that is, again, the whole conversation I had in the forum. That is a huge advantage of this kind of medium, is just the immediacy and like how active, that you have all these users who not only are maybe engaging with the story, but also want to talk to you about it, is kind of a great boon. And on the stuff that with the writers supporting each other, kind of like there's a very active kind of community of people showing each other works in progress and so on. Well, I was just going to say about the translation thing that this is totally a footnote that doesn't have anything to do with anything. But when you like, fluent is also not even really the bar, because I'm fluent in German and Italian, but I cannot, like, The Unraveling, my first novel, was translated into German, but not by me. Like, I could not have translated it into, you know what I mean? Like, I'm perfectly fluent. I can get along well in any conversation. That's like literary language is a whole other level, and like making it like I don't know what beautiful German is. You know what I mean? Like it's like a whole other. Like, being able to communicate is a very different level than like actually being a craftsman in the language, I don't know why I'm saying that. I just wanted to react to the word fluent. Anyway.
Well, I think we're
pretty
at
much
2 hours.
Okay.
So I just wanted to give Jason the
opportunity.
If there's if there's anything else before we let you go, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to that you want to make sure that we mention? No, he's shaking his head no. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Ben, any takeaways?
Well, I have one other thing to say, which we can cut out if necessary, because I'm not quite sure about the protocol. But this is going to be released later, right? We don't release these immediately. It's going to be at least a few weeks. So I just, so it may not be entirely kosher to say this, but like you're both sworn to secrecy until like it's released. I'm currently pricing tickets to Kansas City because The Ghost and the Golem is going to be nominated for a Nebula.
Oh, that's very exciting. Oh my gosh. That's awesome.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
I just got the call like on Sunday. They were like, are you killed? And I was like, yeah. And then I was like, oh my God, that's hilarious. I'm talking to Jason on Thursday, so I'm going to have to tell you guys on air. So no, but Connor, don't say anything. Nobody post anything.
Yeah, we won't say a word. And you're up to like watch the editorial calendar on this and make sure it comes out at an appropriate time.
Yes, it gets.
So...
I'll let you know when it's been published. So we can't drop this episode until it's been released. But
okay.
Anyway, but that's
make sure to reach out because we run a sale on the Nebula nominees. So that there's a whole marketing cycle. So excellent.
Do you want? Should I just send you an email after this to confirm or whatever, or
no, just let me know as soon as you find out the date that things are going to be released.
As soon as going to be released, that's going to be
announced.
I don't actually know when they're going to. I don't think they've told me when it's going to be announced. They published it and they said what was kind of funny because they were like, we don't tell anyone until it's out in Locus, and I was like, well, that's interesting. Locus is still the journal of record, like like the trade magazine is like. Which feels very 20th century. It's like not that they're just going to post it on their website, but like the Journal of Record has to put it out. Yeah. Anyway, but which is great. Go Locus. We love Locus.
Yeah.
Support Locus. It's a 501(c)(3).
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Jason Hill from Choice of Games, Chief Operating Officer, I believe was the title you said.
And Chief Grouch.
And Chief Grouch.
Grouch and Chief.
Yeah, no, it was delightful having you here, and I know my students will be interested in learning more about narrative game design, writing, as a topic. So I'm so glad we could make this happen.
I should say, in case it wasn't clear so far, it was also a delight working with Jason, and it was, a very fun. And Jason was enormously patient because I made everything very complicated, and it took a really long time.
I know he was like 1 or 2 years, and Ben was like, "Yeah, it's going to be 4, so maybe more." Oh, and I'm going to revise it again and re-release.
Yes. Patience of a saint. So, or a tzaddik in this case.
All right.
Most of the time. All
right. Thanks, everybody. See you on the next podcast.
Thank you so much.
We don't have a good sign off. We really should develop one.
Stay human or not.
There you go. So you could be a robot in Choice of Robots. Okay. Thanks so much.
It's your choice.
That's right.
Hey humans, don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more so you don't miss future episodes of MRAH and Rosenbaum Are Humans. Leaving us a good rating also helps us reach a wider audience. If you want to reach us directly to ask questions or continue the conversation, you can email us at mrah@speclit.org. This podcast is hosted by Marianne Mohenraj and Benjamin Rosenbaum. Editing and show notes by Connor Nevitt. Music composed by Thor Bremer, and cover art by Stephanie Bailey. Thanks for tuning in to Mohenraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans.